Hello and welcome back to the Sekimeiya Spun Glass. Last episode we learned a lot about what happened in the days leading up to the 15th of December. And yeah, this time I think we left it off when it literally said, the days tick down until the 15th of December. And I don't know what happens now, so have a look. December 15th, 2011. However, nobody expected what would happen on that day. 8 people were trapped in Ashia Tower, but they weren't alone. That was the catalyst of the construction of a mountainous maze. Who reached its peak? It wasn't everyone who began the climb. You are lucky enough to have access to all its sides, but what about the peak? 3 parties formed the mountain's base, unaware of how high it would go. Okay. I guess these were the 3 parties, Sin, Kate, and Ashia. I don't know what exactly we're choosing here, but let's just start from the top. Let's look at Sin's perspective. When the tower opened, Atase was the only person waiting outside. He wore light attire despite the cold. He bowed at the receptionist and stepped in slowly. A man walked up to him asking for his ticket. After showing it and confirming that he didn't have a phone, he stepped to the hallway B door. By the way, I think this is the first actual confirmation of what we already kind of knew anyway, that being Akaro is Atase. It was very early in the morning. For a while, all he heard was the receptionist shuffling a bunch of papers behind a desk. The next person he saw was Ido. Without looking over, he casually made his way to the hallway. It took him a while to come back. When he did, his clothes were different and he was carrying a cleaning bucket. Atase was relieved. Nothing had happened, so Ido's part of the plan had gone well. He didn't have the cleaning card as it was waiting for Atase with the fake Sekimeiya. Idly mopping the floor, Ido got close to Atase. That was when he dropped a tiny grenade in his pocket. At that point, everything was ready. The action was poised to begin. Atase turned around when he heard something at his back. 2 more people were by the entrance, a boy and a girl. Out of nowhere, Atase felt a sudden wave of heat. He had seen the boy before. In Musashi Gemstones, he had been the first to be hit by the smoke. Atsuki Hakutoki was his name, and he'd been safely discharged from the hospital. Atase swiftly looked away. On that day, his face had been disguised, but what if he was recognized? He stared at the floor as they walked closer to him, clenching his fists tightly. He had to avoid eye contact. The boy next to him had lost someone, and it had been his fault. He had taken a glance at the girl as well. Although he hadn't seen her before, the eyes below her red hair looked identical to the boy's. 9 was distant. Long before it, police officers arrived outside the tower. Atase's rough facial description must have been known. He didn't think he'd be recognized, but he couldn't bring himself to look back. All at once, a wave of people flooded in. Faint chatter took over the silence, but none of it reached Atase. He had to look calm and know exactly what to do. He saw someone he knew outside the lobby. However, that person didn't know who Atase was. His job was to take out a suitcase at 9:06. Ido had left through the opposite hallway a while ago. When he came back, he started to mop the floor a second time. Slowly, the time kept passing. After Ido was done with the little plaza, he entered again, mopping the new snowy footprints and the already shining floor. For a while, he kept doing that. He had to stay there as he knew what was soon to happen in the hallways.
Shiria?
Atase's heart skipped a beat. Behind him, he'd heard the voice of Kate Kuiji. However, that name...
Is this yours? I think you dropped it.
Thank you. Atase's head slowly turned to the girl. She wasn't Shiria. That was the name of the girl who must have died. Who was that then? Atase would soon learn. At 9, the door to hallway B opened. Through it came Naomi Kapka, who gave a brief explanation of the event. It was time. Only 4 minutes were left. Well, it's not time then, it's 4 minutes before time. Are you free the first group? Yeah, we've been here for a while. Perfect. Please follow me to the event room to be the first to see the Sekimeiya. Quietly, the 3 people at the front of the line stepped into the hallway and were drawn to the room in the middle. A single cabinet was there, covered by a velvet curtain. It was a sight Atase had seen before through a picture. Alright, it would be helpful if you could tell me your name so that I know how to address you. I'm Mia Moiromo. That was her name. It was the one Atase remembered. Mia Moiromo had been in the shop as well, but she hadn't been hit by the impact of the explosion. Akira Isato. For the first time in hours, Atase opened his mouth, voicing the name that had been on his ticket. Atsuki Hakutoki. Naomi began to explain the story behind the Sekimeiya. As she did, Atase wondered if an ounce of truth was coming out of her mouth. Part of the experience is the touch, so I will open the glass and let you experience it yourselves. However, I must insist that you be gentle and keep your hands inside the cabinet at all times. She took out a keyring. After inserting a small one into the cabinet, she unlocked it. T? Who's T? Is that Atase?
I have a question.
What is it? Atase suppressed his nervousness as best he could. The cabinet had been unlocked, so the plan was very close to succeeding. However, a few seconds still remained until 9:04. He attempted to slow Naomi down. She had been about to raise the curtain and let them touch the gemstone. If that happened before the smoke was released, the Sekimeiya could be hit by it, which could later reveal that the clean one was Sin's fake.
You keep mentioning how valuable the Sekimeiya is, but is there proof of that? The way you're explaining it, you don't even say what kind of gem it is, only that it's rare. But the value could have been arbitrarily created by Ashia, as it's not being officially recognized as anything more than an unusual discovery.
Well, I will let you decide that for yourself. As you said, it's not categorized because nobody was able to properly appraise it. That's all you need to be assured of its value.
I apologize for being skeptical, but you must be aware that Ashia aren't exactly recognized for their fairness.
Do you have a reason to say this?
Yes, that everyone in the lobby sounded as skeptical as I am.
Maybe seeing it for yourself will convince you.
That's what I'm hoping.
After a pause, Naomi shook her head and crouched beside the cabinet. When she raised the curtain, a huge cloud of smoke rose with it, coming from the grenade Atase had taken out of his pocket. Ah! Before anyone could resist, Atase had already fallen to the floor, looking down and covering his nose. He avoided having his consciousness fade. Once everyone plummeted down, a sudden, unsettling silence consumed the room. What was happening outside? Had everyone evacuated? Had the gems been brought out in a suitcase? For a few seconds, Atase had to wait to make sure nobody remained conscious. He heard someone running through hallway A. It must have been the man with the gemstones, but why? 2 minutes hadn't passed yet. Atase's eyes widened. What the hell was that sound? He waited, wondering what was happening. Had the plan been a failure? After a few seconds, the loud noise faded. However, Atase could not hear anything else outside the room. When he looked up, he couldn't believe he was in the same place. Very little light was being cast from the ceiling and the walls had become dark. The 3 people who'd been with him were lying on the floor. Once he knew he could move, he silently stepped to hallway B. Again, It was hard to believe it was the same place as before, however nobody was there. Covering his face, Atase dashed to the cleaning room. There was light, almost no smoke had gone through the door. Occupying most of the space, the cart sat in the room. Without hesitating, he dropped the smoke grenade inside it. The fake Sekimeiya was there, however Atase couldn't touch it with his bare hands or he would leave smoky fingerprints on it. He took it with the clean sleeves of his shirt and brought it to the hallway, crouching so that the remaining smoke wouldn't make contact with it. Back in the event room, he walked to the cabinet. Like Naomi had been about to do, he raised the curtain. Huh? He stopped cold, suddenly filled with confusion. 2 glowing stones were in front of him. Why? He couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. Had there been 2 Sekimeiya? Atase had to rush, but he didn't know what to do. If he took both gemstones, Sin's plan would never work. Dumbfounded, he reached for one of the 2. He could only replace a single one. He felt a screen of glass that he was able to slide open. Then, without placing his fingers on it, he took a gemstone out, swapping it with his. Still in awe, he closed the glass and dropped the curtain down. He ran back with the gem in his hands. After locating the door, he moved into hallway B and silently went to the cleaning room. He dropped the Sekimeiya next to the grenade, and once he was done, Atase rushed back to the event room. He made sure to close the door and stepped to the spot where he'd fallen down. However, the darkness prevented him from noticing something. Naomi was no longer there. While Atase lay down, he heard sounds around him. The floor wasn't empty. Just what was happening? Everything started to become stranger when nobody entered where he was. His job was to stay there, and that was what he did. But he couldn't make sense of it. Why weren't they being rescued? The boy woke up. That was the start of a very long day. During the previous weeks, Atase had come up with countless outcomes. However, the real one was far from any he'd devised. They were trapped. The alarm he'd heard had removed all methods of escape. When he learned Naomi had left the event room before his return, he had to hide his fear. Could she have noticed Atase's absence upon awakening? That was one of his initial questions. They didn't stop piling up. Atase would have to spend 12 hours in that building until he could leave. He didn't know how worried he had to be or what had triggered the alarm. Even though the building was full of cameras, he knew not to be afraid of them. He was told the internet connection had been cut by the alarm. That meant that in the meantime, Sin couldn't remotely access the computer. However, he knew his group well. According to Kate, at 2100, the connection would come back, and Sin would immediately erase all the recorded footage. He recalled the conversation he'd had with his boss word by word. He knew how important it was for him not to fail. Therefore, despite the unforeseen alarm, Atase had only one priority: to make the plan a success. Okay, so that was Sin's part of these few hours, I suppose. Let's go to Kate next. It was almost time. Upon arriving at the tower, Kate had listened to the latest recording. As he'd hoped, Ido and his boss had talked one last time and gone over their movements. Kate took out the SD card. He couldn't allow that audio to be heard by anyone else. As he didn't want the card on his person either, he hid it in the security room. The time was rapidly approaching, and he didn't have the opportunity to go back to the staff room. While he tried to remain calm, he hid the voice recorder as well. Although the large device could have been found if Ashia searched, he knew the SD card wouldn't be, which was all that mattered. Through the monitors, Kate saw the first group approaching the event room. He had to act. Even though nobody was seeing him, he approached the hallway nonchalantly. During the previous days, he'd kept coming up with good excuses to get out of the security room at the time. Hallway A was empty, but as soon as Kate entered it, so did someone else. From the lobby came a man with long hair who he'd never seen before. Paying no attention to Kate, he walked forward. Behind the handrails, Kate knew the grenades were concealed. However, he couldn't look at them because that footage was going to be reviewed. Kate couldn't get distracted. Keeping his expression natural, he stepped into the lobby. The room was full of people. All the visitors formed a line behind hallway B, while police officers conversed with Ashia's guard. Dote and Asfu, Kate's co-workers, greeted him with a smile. Their job was to uncover the cabinets in most of the crystal rooms, but they knew very few people there that they wanted to see those. One more person reacted to Kate's arrival, the janitor. However, only Kate noticed it as Ido looked away immediately. Nobody was looking at him, and he didn't want to walk away from the door. As if waiting for the conversation to end, he stared at the police as they talked. Kate's plan wasn't guaranteed to work, but he wasn't at risk. Once the smoke was released, the chance to step back into the hallway might not have existed. If someone gestured at Kate to evacuate, he couldn't turn around. However, it didn't matter. He wouldn't be blamed for the attack, and Sin's plan would still fail. Furthermore, it might have been possible to sneak away outside and then re-enter the building through the storeroom anyway. The time passed faster than Kate had imagined. All of a sudden, he noticed the light in hallway A disappear. "What's this?" "Smoke! Something happened in the hallway!" Someone opened the door in front of the crowd. In an instant, a plume of smoke invaded the lobby, and the door was forcibly shut again. "It's in both hallways!" Kate felt a shock going through his body. That was the moment. In the blink of an eye, everyone had turned around toward the exit, while both police officers were alerting their superiors. As quickly as he could, Kate dashed into the hallway and dropped to his hands and knees. On the floor, someone almost crashed onto him. A person he couldn't distinguish through the veil of smoke rapidly crawled to the lobby, slamming the door shut behind them. Suddenly, Kate could only hear his heartbeat. That person must have been the man he'd seen entering the hallway, but he couldn't be heard anymore. Only faint yells could. That was until a loud alarm rang through the building. Immediately afterward, a rough sound came from the lobby, along with stronger yells. The shutter was closing. And just like that, Kate's plan was set in motion. He had trapped himself, but nobody had realized it. He'd seen the floor through the cameras. It was very likely only him and Artise were conscious. With utmost care, he slowly crawled toward the event room. From outside, he heard a sound. Artise was standing up. Amidst the pure silence, Kate heard him going to the cleaning room. That was Kate's chance to open the door slightly. When he did, he saw the floor of the event room, but all the bodies were too far away to be distinguished. Through the gap, he stared. He knew the darkness would prevent Artise from noticing him, and there was something he had to see. Days earlier, he had uncovered the cabinet's curtain. He had seen two identical Sekimeiya lying atop the cushion. Although he'd gotten scared at first, Sin hadn't planted a fake yet. Ashia had two identical gemstones. Sin would only be able to replace one, but Kate had the chance to obtain both. He merely had to observe from the hallway to learn which one got replaced. It only took Artise a few seconds to come back. When he did, he approached the cabinet while holding a glowing stone. Despite the darkness, once he uncovered the cabinet, Kate was able to perceive Artise's shock. Two gemstones were contained in the cabinet. He was completely still until he reached for one of them. After taking out the rightmost one, Artise placed his own inside. He ran back without wasting even a second. That was Kate's moment. Overwhelmed by his unrelenting heartbeat, he rushed to the cabinet, covering his nose as he looked down. Admittedly, there was a small difference between them, but he knew the gem on the left was the valuable one. After taking it out, he hurriedly dropped the curtain as if nothing had happened. He re-entered the hallway. Everything was going as planned, but his frantic breaths refused to steady. The other Sekimeiya would be in the cleaning cart. Kaze only had to be in the tower for a few more seconds. Hallway C was still being recorded, so he dashed to the lobby. However, on the way, he abruptly stopped himself. He stared at his hands in confusion. What had happened? There was no glow there. It didn't make any sense. He could feel the Sekimeiya's touch, but it didn't look like it was there. Bewildered, he stepped toward the light in the lobby, and once it illuminated his hands, he saw what had happened. The Sekimeiya was no longer white. Puzzled, he looked around him. A metal shutter was covering the exit, but somehow the gemstone in his hands was more bizarre. He looked at it with concern at the same time that he recalled Lei's words. It was essential for the Sekimeiya to remain in a cold space, and it couldn't be touched outside the cabinet. Had he damaged it? A nervous sweat broke out across his body. He lightly held the Sekimeiya with his suit instead so that he wouldn't directly contact it. The view of hallway B was identical. Not much could be seen a few steps ahead. Artisan must have been out of the cleaning room already. Slowly, Kate turned its doorknob. The cart was there. Inside it, Kate saw the second Sekimeiya, which, unlike the one between his hands, still glowed dimly. He reached his right arm inside and took out the other Sekimeiya without touching it directly. Amazed, Kate stared at it. He couldn't know if the cloth of his shirt had made a difference, but its glow hadn't vanished that time. But the amazement quickly morphed into stupefaction. The Sekimeiya was hot. He couldn't believe it, but there was no mistaking it. The Sekimeiya that had been in the cart was clearly warmer than everything around it. Why? Was it also due to the absence of cold? Kate had to ignore it. He was running out of time. After stepping back into the hallway, he went inside the storeroom. He knew the secret mechanism very well. Entering the secret corridor, he placed both Sekimeiya on a suitcase lying open on the floor. He had left it there to be able to leave with the gemstones in the future. Finally, he felt the last door, and as he did, he wondered. Would anyone see him? It couldn't be. Everyone must have been behind the main door. What? Where is it? Petrified, Kate kept going through all his pockets. The key wasn't there. There was no way out for him without it. Desperately, he looked at all the keys he had, but none of them had the particular rust he most wanted to feel. He realized that he must have dropped it. He kept it separately, and he'd verified that he had it in the security room. Therefore, he dropped it in hallway A when he'd been crawling toward the event room. Since his pocket had been so close to the floor, he hadn't noticed the sound of it falling out. Fuck, no! Tightening his fist, he went back to the hallway. It was drenched in darkness, but the key had to be somewhere. He moved to the wall he'd crawled next to and repeated the action, scanning the entire surface. Yes! Although he'd lost many precious seconds, he found it camouflaged under the smoke. He'd been trying to make very little noise, but he couldn't care about that anymore. As fast as he could, he ran back to the storeroom. He stopped before the secret exit. A bright grassy field was outside it, and he was so close to seeing it. He located the keyhole and inserted the chili key into it. What? It wasn't turning. The door wasn't opening. No, there's no way. Why is it? Something was preventing him from turning the key, and no matter how much he tried, it didn't budge. Such a thing had never happened to him before. Did they learn about this door? Subsumed by the darkness, Kate fell to his knees in defeat. The last method of escape, she'd held as a trump card for years, had betrayed him. The situation only became worse for him when he turned around. There was nothing there. Where are the Sekimeiya? The two telltale glows weren't there. When he crawled to where the suitcase should have been, he saw that it had vanished as well. On the floor, Kate was consumed by a wave of cold fear. He'd been outsmarted. There was no other explanation.
before he touched the Sekimeiya.
2 doors blocked his view into hallway A, but he was scared to leave. Sin must have been there. Kate waited. Were they going to come now that they've defeated him? What were they going to do? Would Kate's name be exposed? Those were the only thoughts he could formulate. Kate looked up. He'd heard a brief sound. Someone was in the hallway. Slowly, he rose and stepped out of the secret corridor, then gripped the doorknob. Hallway A was still dark, but a bit more light had begun to pass through the smoke cover. That was how he saw a human figure walking to the lobby as it carried his suitcase. It was Naomi, one of the people who must have fallen unconscious. Given the conversations he'd heard, Kate knew she wasn't working with Sin. In an instant, he ran up behind her. He had to talk to her before everyone woke up. However, as soon as she heard his movements, Naomi sprinted away to escape him. When Kate set foot into the lobby, Naomi was nowhere to be seen. The hallway B door was slightly closed, but he couldn't rush. She could easily have been hiding behind a desk or in the room below. He stepped forward slowly. His goal was to find Naomi as soon as possible, to learn how much she knew, what had happened, what she intended to do, and to retrieve the suitcase. But Kate didn't make it far before he turned back to the door. He heard running footsteps on the other side of the hallway. He peered into the hallway, but the dark fog prevented a clear line of sight. Despite that, he was able to see that someone was there, and they began to go up the stairs. He ran without thinking. He had to stop Naomi no matter how much panic assaulted him. The grey door was unlocked. That was all he needed to confirm that it was Naomi who'd gone up. He stepped onto the second floor. The echoing sound of footsteps was clearly audible. They were still running, so he had to pursue them. His life depended on it. He put all his strength into his legs and ran, disregarding everything else his body demanded. Rest and oxygen could wait. The stairs toward the 4th floor were before him. He maintained the highest speed possible, but he already knew everything was over. No matter what, the plan he'd crafted would never succeed. Before reaching the top, he tripped on a step. He intercepted the fall with his wrist, but he couldn't immediately stand back up. Fuck. When he did manage to rise, he was about to keep running. However, he realized that was a bad idea. Wait, shit, she's going to the attic. Finally, he understood how doomed he was. He couldn't open the attic, where Naomi would lock herself with the suitcase. Continuing to go up was a futile waste of time. In total disarray, Kate turned around. How much did Naomi know? Had he identified Kate? What was he supposed to do? Overwhelmed, he tried to think of a course of action. More people were on the crystal floor. He had to act as if he'd gotten trapped like everyone else. There were many things he had to take care of. His hands trembled as he walked back down. He balled them into fists and slowly released them. The trembling stopped, but he was internally collapsing. Attempting a calm breath, he walked to the crystal floor where he began to look around as if he'd been innocently imprisoned. And then we're only left with one more. Asya. Let's see. Naomi's eyes opened in pain. Before them was a pair of shoes. She recognized them, but not the scenery behind them. Where was she? A sharp sound refocused all of her senses. She was in the event room, and there had just been an attack in the tower. After getting that far, she almost gasped. Those shoes belonged to Kate, and what she'd heard was the cabinet opening. While she was still processing that information, the steps began to depart. She had to stop him. At once, Naomi considered the possibility that Kate had been responsible for the smoke. Her head hurt and her limbs took a few seconds to respond. However, she was able to force her body up. Speechless, she saw two people who she'd just met on the floor. Their names were Atsuki and Shiroya. But what about the third person? Another man had been with them, and Naomi couldn't find him. She grabbed her glasses from the floor. Immediately her sight blackened as the smoke had covered the lenses. Trying not to inhale what lingered of it in the air, she slowly staggered to hallway A, wondering how long she'd been asleep and cleaning her glasses with her sleeves. 6 people had fallen unconscious. When the smoke was released, Naomi had been looking at the cabinet. Out of all of them, she'd been the farthest from the source, as everyone else had been next to a grenade. Atsusa had faked his unconsciousness, meaning that in the event room, Naomi's was the only adult body to be knocked out. Added to the lesser quantity of smoke that she inhaled, she would have been the first to awaken. Because of that, when Kate stepped next to her ears, she was brought back to reality minutes before everyone else. She couldn't believe the appearance of the hallway. Like in the event room, a dark, sticky coating was everywhere, blocking out the light. Thanks to hallway C's ceiling light, though, she was able to see the storeroom closing. It had been Kate, hadn't it? She'd spoken to him a few times, but she'd never gotten a specific impression of him. Approaching the storeroom, Naomi hoped she'd been mistaken. Kate should have been in the security room, so perhaps he was acting against the attack by protecting the target. Outside the door, she heard a noise. What was it? It sounded like a door was being forced open, but that didn't make any sense. When it stopped, Naomi heard the person approaching and sharply burst to her side out of fear of being attacked. It was Kate. However, he didn't see Naomi, and instead he rushed back into the darkness. As soon as Naomi peeked inside the vacant room, her mouth dropped. What the hell was she seeing? The wall was open. All doubts vanished from her mind. Kate was behind the attack. The corridor extended beyond the wall, one she'd never known about. As much as she couldn't believe it, it explained a lot of things. Then she took notice of a glow on the floor, the Sekimeiya. Concealing her footsteps, she approached a faint light. It was in a suitcase, and it appeared both gemstones were there. Slowly, she closed it and brought it out of the room. Although she couldn't see anyone, she was able to perceive Kate nearby. He was there, in the hallway. Wishing not to be seen, she sprinted toward hallway C. Before she could breathe steadily, she heard Kate getting closer. Without moving her eyes, Naomi continued to take slow steps back. But Kate wasn't coming for her. He simply re-entered the storeroom. That was when Naomi finally thought about how strange everything was. What was that silence? What had happened after she'd lost consciousness? From where she was, she could see that hallway B looked the same. Something of a large scale had happened, so why was nobody else there? She felt frozen and clueless as to what to do. At least she had retrieved the Sekimeiya. She had to leave. The exit was on the other side of the hallways, but she could only see a dark void. Was someone else there? She hesitated, scared to surround herself with the darkness. Holding tightly onto the suitcase, she took a step forward. A thin fog obscured her vision, but the lobby door shortly came into view. However, alarm bells went off in her head. Someone was behind her, running at full speed. She couldn't look back. With the scarce energy she had, she went through the door. Her eyes went wider than ever before. A metal shutter was in front of the door. It didn't make any sense, but she didn't have time to think. She had to keep running. Covering her face, she ran through hallway B. When she returned to where she'd been, she confirmed she wasn't being chased anymore. She couldn't leave the building. It was ridiculous, but a huge piece of metal she'd never seen was blocking the way out. If Kate was the one who'd run behind her, there was only one place where she'd be safe. She tried to open the elevator, but it wasn't on that floor. She couldn't wait for it, so she took out her keys and dashed up the stairs. She unlocked the grey door, but she couldn't waste time locking it behind her. If her pursuer was Kate, he had that key as well. She didn't slow down. Once she was on the 3rd floor, a sound alerted her. She was being chased again. Through the many floors of the tower, her goal was to make it to the attic. The Sekimeiya bounced inside the suitcase, and Naomi gripped the key without stopping once. At last, the final floor was in sight, and nobody was behind her. With the key, she locked the door behind her. She had made it. Kate wouldn't be able to reach that place. Panting, she went up the narrow staircase. Naomi stepped onto the sofa, where she dropped her keys and the suitcase. Exhausted, she took a moment to catch her breath. The bright living room looked nothing like the lowest floor. When she opened the case, she saw both identical gemstones. Even though she'd brought them to safety, she'd been told the cabinet's temperature was essential for their well-being. Huh? Something was strange. The interior of the suitcase was very hot. Naomi felt around in it and gripped it tightly, unable to comprehend why it had heated up so much. What? Out of nowhere, both of the Sekimeiya vanished. Astonished, Naomi stared at the empty suitcase. She had felt one of their white surfaces for an instant before both had disappeared. She couldn't comprehend what had occurred. It wasn't possible. They couldn't have disappeared. However, they weren't there anymore. What? Then she noticed something else was gone. Her keys, which she'd left next to the suitcase. She questioned her own memories. She had just left the keyring there, hadn't she? Or had she left it in the keyhole? Speechless, she peeked down the stairs. It wasn't there, but it wasn't on the sofa either. She couldn't understand. How could her keys have disappeared with the Sekimeiya? It was utterly nonsensical. She'd looked through the sofa, the suitcase, and on herself. They really weren't anywhere. Wondering if she'd gone insane, Naomi walked to the hallway. She knew the layout of the attic well, and she was sure she was alone. She'd intended to keep the Sekimeiya in a safe place, but somehow she'd failed. Completely lost, she wondered what to do. More people were on the crystal floor, and they might have woken up already. However, she couldn't leave. Without the key, she couldn't unlock the door she'd just locked, so she pressed the elevator button. But nothing happened. Naomi couldn't believe her situation, but no matter how much she thought about it, she didn't think she was wrong about what had happened. She'd seen the Sekimeiya disappear before her eyes, so the same must have happened with the keys. What had happened in the tower? Had she been hallucinating everything since she'd fallen unconscious? She simply couldn't accept that she'd trapped herself in the attic. But she had. Alone, on the highest floor of the tower, Naomi had no method of escape. Although, I want to quickly read through that again, because I was slightly distracted by my own brain. Okay, so possibly she touched... okay, yeah, okay. She had felt one of their white surfaces for an instant before both had disappeared. Yes, okay, I see. So she got teleported as well teleported. I guess, no, got brought to the other timeline, the other world, the other universe, the other alternate reality. I don't know. She got brought somewhere else. Yeah. I guess we just go back like this. Sometimes when I read and that, a thought enters my mind, I can continue reading, that's not the problem, but I just, my mind is elsewhere and I just read it out and don't actually get what I'm reading. So I have to go back a bit. And that was an important part, so I definitely wanted to go back to that so that I didn't misunderstand anything. And so began the day. How did it end, however? Okay, that was chapter 4. So now we're at chapter 5, Man-Made Universe. My body crumpled down. I couldn't keep going. A month? What kind of joke was that? I couldn't bear one more second. Shiria's words played back in my head. Don't forget what I said. I meant all of it. I laughed alone. Didn't know where I was, what anything had become. None of it. Nothing we'd done had any meaning. We'd made it to the end of that impossibly long day for nothing. The words Shiria had abandoned me with. Were they supposed to be reassuring? I tried to continue yelling her name, but my voice broke. She'd known what would happen and hadn't warned us. She'd kept waiting at our side, bolstering our hope, until she'd run away. Why? She would never have done that. I couldn't let a single day change my view of her. But I couldn't help but despair. I wanted to leave. I wanted to be hit by the icy air and feel released. I wanted to talk to more people, even if they were the police. And it wouldn't happen. Could we survive an entire month? Of course not. Julia hadn't been mentioned in the recording, so would I not see her for weeks? Would the nightmare persist in the Sekimeiya's domain? It was too horrible of a thought to bear. People had died, and I still didn't know who, how, why. The lights had gone out, so I followed their example. I closed my eyes, intensifying the darkness, before I felt once again how insignificant I was. Isla, where? Erina's voice came from the hallway. She's not here. What? Where is she? What are you talking about? Sai sounded confused too, near the end of hallway A. She's not here. Could she mean? I mustered the strength to dash back out of the lobby. Look, she isn't in the cabinet. I entered the crystal room. Although I knew its walls were stained dark, I couldn't differentiate them from the rest. I stepped to the cabinet where Isla rested and reached my hand inside. She wasn't there. You're right. She was here just minutes ago. What the fuck? Did Shiria take her out? Why would she do that? I'm sure you can explain why she did everything else. What if she was saved? That could be it, right? Well, something just happened, that's for sure. I followed Sai out. Utterly lost, we went to check the bathrooms. Man, what the fuck is this? Naomi isn't here either. We ran to the crystal room where we'd found her first body. It wasn't there. The curtain wasn't on the floor either. Did all the bodies disappear? In that case, Kate must not be in the security room either, but why the hell is it locked? And it wasn't only the bodies. We'd thought that if at 9 the exit didn't unlock, we would let the others listen to the recording. However, that could no longer happen. The recorder itself must have vanished alongside Isla. Atsuki, when the lights went out, did you really not see anything? I didn't see anything, no. Then why did Erin and I see a flashing light? It lasted an instant, but I find it really strange that it didn't happen to you. I don't know. I have no idea. Why was I the only one to not see that? Did that indicate what happened? Shiria ran to hallway B and told us not to follow her. Was she going to the Sekimeiya in the cabinet? Then, out of nowhere, the lights went off, and the shutter remained unmoving. What the fuck had happened? Shiria's face had looked the opposite of malicious, so why would she have done anything harmful? That's wrong grammar there. She couldn't have trapped us there for an entire month. Erina was behind us, and she sounded like she was in pain. Although he couldn't see it, it appeared her finger had started bleeding out of nowhere. Erina, before the lights went off, you went to the mechanical room, right? Yes. Why? I thought maybe someone was there. We still have to find Akro. There's no way you believe her, right? The light breakers are there. Did she turn them off? What the hell happened to your finger? What? How would I have done that? They're locked up and there's still electricity. The cameras are working. I glanced at the ceiling of the hallway where the faint green lights of the cameras could be seen. And I don't know, but it really hurts. Did you just hear that? A drop of blood fell to the floor, but I can't see what kind of injury I have. She heard a drop of blood falling to the floor. I do not believe you. You could have only turned off the breakers that control the light, right? That is what I was also thinking. Go check them. You'll see that I didn't touch any. Did the light go off in the mechanical room? Yes. And how are we supposed to check them? We can't see anything. Doesn't your wristwatch give off some light? Do you think this is going to do anything? Sai lit his watch's blue screen, but it didn't illuminate anything in front of it. Is Shiria still here? Is she currently listening to us? Don't forget what I said. I meant all of it. If she's not here anymore, then whose doing is this? It can't be just a coincidence that Erina left our side minutes before the shutter was going to open. A month in a tower. It was impossible. There was no way that fate awaited us, but merely thinking about it was almost enough to make me lose my grip on reality. I couldn't stand it anymore. I wanted to know what was happening. I wanted to know what had been going on since the start. Now, stay here and don't follow me. Why? Why did I have to stay there? Leaving the tower with Shirei was the only thing I wanted. It was the only thing both of us wanted. Are the other floors going to be like this too? You're asking as if I have a clue. We trudged along bit by bit. In hallway C, Sai tried to open the elevator. It's not here. He found the button on the wall and pressed it. A while later, it still hadn't lit up. Unless it's open on another floor, the elevator must have been disabled too. I didn't want to use it though. Let's take the stairs. What happened to the lights? That voice. I turned around to where it had come from. Akara? Whose voice was it? What do you think? What are the remaining mysteries that you have solved? Perhaps you would like to prove yourself as well. You will have the chance to do that. Show that the peak is also awaiting you, that the keys you were given were put to use.